reminder as to why we're here today. As committees have kind of formed, especially when it comes to the transition from the Board of Architecture review and transition to a new established committee within last year, the Design Review Committee, DRC. We have been reviewing the process and trying to establish guidelines to make sure that there's clear responsibilities between the Planning Commission and the DRC, and that we also establish the most expedient way for processing applications. So having done that, Chelsea has done a lot of work in reviewing the code and making sure that everything makes sense. We've been reviewing it from the planning perspective to ensure that there is a clarity and a streamlined process. So with that, we've come up with some recommendations that we took to the DRC at their last meeting, which they provided some additional input as to the clarity of where the DRC has its responsibilities, which that committee was established by the City Council. And so with that input, we've made some additional modifications to the proposed changes to the City Code, which are presented to you today. Which further clarify how the DRC responsibilities are then forwarded to the Planning Commission, how the Planning Commission would be making final decisions and determinations within your purview. So we're here today to receive your input, and then that input will be taken into consideration, and we'll be presenting the proposed code changes to the City Council for their final approval. And with that, I'll hand it over to Chelsea.
Thank you. Yes, so today I wanted to talk to you about the proposed changes that we have, that staff came up with to help address the divisions between the Design Review Committee and the Planning Commission's duties, as Zena was just explaining. So I know this is a big staff report. There were just a lot of code provisions that got roped into this. But there's a couple of buckets of types of changes that we're talking about. And one of them, you'll see a lot of changes throughout the staff report attachments, where we're making changes to the titles of the planning staff that's referenced in the code. And that's just to reflect a reorganization that has already happened. City Council made the decision to make planning manager the highest position in the planning department. And so while we were in there making amendments to the code for more substantive reasons, we also wanted to address that and remove references to planning director and clarify, who actually is going to be the decision maker or the person receiving an application and such. So you'll see a lot of those changes, but that's mostly just because those terms appear in sections where other changes were being made. So the big bucket is clarifying the Design Review Committee and the Planning Commission's powers. This stemmed out of the Design Review Committee wanting some clarification because under our current process, there's projects that go before both bodies, before the DRC and the Planning Commission, but then would come back to the DRC for a final review after Planning Commission project approval. And that created some confusion about which body actually had the final say on aspects of the project that the DRC was reviewing. So what we're proposing and what is reflected in these code provisions is that when the Design Review Committee is reviewing an application that will not go before the Planning Commission, the items, parts of that application that are within the Design Review Committee's purview, so landscaping, lighting, those types of things, the Design Review Committee would be the final deciding body on those aspects, and their decision would be appealable to the City Council. However, if they're reviewing a project or parts of a project that are then going to go before the Planning Commission, for example, pieces of a development plan or a conditional use permit, the Design Review Committee would then be providing recommendations to the Planning Commission on those aspects of the project that are in their purview, and you as the Planning Commission would then have make the final decision on the overall permit, taking into account the DRC's recommendations. And we've added language to the Planning Commission's powers and duties such that the Planning Commission should, listen to and defer to the DRC's recommendations on those aspects of a project that are really within their purview that City Council has designated are DRC items such as lighting or landscaping or colors. And that if there is some deviation, the Planning Commission should explain why they are deciding to deviate from the Design Review Committee's recommendations. And then in that type of a situation where there's DRC review and then Planning Commission review, the Planning Commission's decision is what's appealable to the City Council. So the Design Review Committee's recommendations to the Planning Commission would not be separately appealable to the City Council. So that's sort of the structure that we've tried to create so that we eliminate projects having to go round and round between the Planning Commission and the DRC, and that it's more of a streamlined process and it's very clear which body is making the final decision for any given project. So a lot of the changes are reflecting that process. Similar and related to that, there are several sections in the code where it refers to the Design Review Committee's decisions being appealable to the Planning Commission, but then it cites a code provision that's talking about appeals to the City Council. So staff, after looking at that, decided that seemed to be a typo, an error. So we've corrected that, and anywhere where it's saying a DRC decision is separately appealable, it's going straight to the City Council. So we've cleaned that up. And then there's just some other code provision cleanups that we wanted to include. For instance, a big one was taking out references to second residential units. That's just an outdated term. State law in this area, as we've talked about in other meetings, has really overtaken the local control of this area, and what's now called accessory dwelling units. So the municipal code provisions that dealt with second residential units are outdated, and the city's not applying them anymore. So we're recommending that we just clean that out of the code. And then there's a few other places where we're fixing a typo. And finally, just in section 1161, cleaning up some language to make sure that it reflects the city's actual practices. So those are the changes that we're recommending. Again, the heart of it is clarifying the roles between the two bodies. And I'm happy to answer any questions, or if there's specific parts of the voluminous appendix or attachments to the staff report, I'm happy to talk about those as well.
Okay. Thank you, Chelsea. Any questions on the staff report before we go to public comment? No, I guess I'm seeing none. We'll move on to public comment. I have one speaker slip on this agenda item. Patrick Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. I appreciate the opportunity to speak before the group today. My name is Patrick Kavanaugh, and I am the chair of the Design Review Committee. And I'm here to speak on this issue regarding the proposed amendments to the city code, particularly those in attachment B. There are 4 attachments in the materials that were prepared and distributed. And attachment B contain those amendments that relate really to the scope of responsibilities and duties of the Design Review Committee. And I think that the cover memo by Assistant City Attorney O'Sullivan did a very good job of describing the background of these amendments to the city code. We actually initiated requests to the city manager and the city attorney in our meeting in September to look at ways in which we could streamline the process, because it was cumbersome for applicants to be caught in a loop situation and cause delays and have to come back and modify their proposals and so forth. And we, again, we're just in the sort of the first few months. I guess we're closing in on the 1 year existence of DRC next month, and wanted to look at ways in which we could streamline the process and make it easier for applicants to get their projects through. And I think that, again, the work that the city manager, the planning consultant, and the city attorney have done meet that requirement. It's my intention today to confirm for the Planning Commission, the DRC's support of this proposal. We did review this at our meeting in November, and we also, I note that a number of the comments that were made there are incorporated in, a couple small things really are incorporated in here. These amendments do reduce the DRC's authority because it makes your decisions, our decisions essentially advisory or for certain kinds of actions that the city attorney talked about, projects or whatever. But I think that we're looking at, even though they may reduce some of the DRC's powers and duties, we know that that also results in clarification and streamlining of those processes. So with regard to the amendments relating to the powers and duties of the Design Review Committee, I have no objection and support their approval, and I'm comfortable saying that that's true on behalf of all the other members of the Design Review Committee. I have no position regarding the other amendments presented for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Anybody else like to speak on this item in-house? There's no, anybody online that would like to speak? Let me see. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion.
So if I can just say one thing in regards to these changes, the projects that you've seen over the last couple of years would have a series of conditions in them that would say, Design Review Committee will review lighting, Design Review Committee would review final landscaping, those kind of things. Those conditions will not be in the projects anymore because the Design Review Committee will have reviewed them up front. You're the final decision maker. And so the package of materials that you will be getting are probably going to be more refined than you've had in the past because the DRC is going to want to make sure that they have one bite at the apple and they get their opportunity to review to the best of their ability the recommendations that they'll make to you as the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission will take the final action based on those recommendations or change them accordingly. And the project will not go back to the DRC. This is part of the streamlining effort, and we did have several projects that kind of went into a roundabout way of addressing some of the conditions that are placed on them. And this is, I think everybody believes this will be the best way to move these projects forward.
Just a question on that. If the Planning Commission makes a decision that changes the ground rules that the Design Review Committee made their original evaluation on, it still would not go back to them? It would be up to the Planning Commission to do that?
There's one or two options. The Planning Commission can go ahead and take that action. We would ask that there be findings or a reason why it's contrary to what the DRC did, or we can send it back to the DRC with suggestions from the Planning Commission and then bring it back to the Planning Commission for final action. It's better in the long run to have those kind of debates happening as part of the original approvals rather than maybe a year later when the package is coming in for final construction plans to question what happened between the Planning Commission and the DRC.
Okay. Any questions on that?
Just a general question. One of the changes that I see, big changes, it has nothing to do with the DRC, it has to do with the whole layout, is that we are now calling, it's a planning director, no, excuse me, planning manager, like it's a city manager. What is the designate of the city manager? It's throughout.
I'll take that question. So as you would notice with the last financial plan with the last budget approval for the current fiscal year that we're in for fiscal year 21-22. There was a number of reorganizational items that were included in the budget, which was approved by the city council. And that reorganized the structure of several of the departments, including reorganization of the planning and building department or divisions. So instead of the planning manager overseeing the planning assistant as well as building official contract and a building technician, we now have a planning manager, which is part of the administration umbrella department. So the manager is actually a slightly lower level designation. So if you think of department head versus manager, so it's above supervisor, but it's a little bit lower level at the management level set position. It is the highest position in the planning for the city. So it is your planning professional position. And then that position oversees position of the assistant planner, which we already have in the city, and that position is filled. And then also the building contract, which that building contract is self-contained and it's under the direction of the building official. There's a plan checker and technicians working within that. So that's the reorganization that was approved by the city council, and we are now in the process of hiring a planning manager. And our code just had references to planning director throughout, so as we started doing this cleanup, we wanted to make sure that we have some clarity as to who those people referenced to in the code could be.
I'm not sure she answered the question.
Well, and I'm wondering about the planning manager's designee.
So if
Because
you...
that person, when I look at this, a ton of it is either the city manager, the planning manager, or this designee, which that's a new position as far as I'm concerned, which has a ton of power, equal to the city manager, equal to the planning manager when it comes to conditional use permits. If somebody's sick, if someone's gone, if they're equal. So there's three positions, because it's an or, it's not and, it's a city manager, a planning manager, or his or her designee. That gives me huge concern.
I would agree that the way that the code is written is more flexible now. I would remind you that the city code also sets the city manager's responsibility, which includes management of all employees under the city manager, including the planning manager. The way that we've kind of modified this language was that for some of the decisions that are some of the decisions, it's a city manager or city manager's designee, which could be the planning manager or some alternate position. And then some of the decisions are more clearly stating that it could be the planning manager, or planning manager could, within their authority, assign somebody else to those functions. So yes, you are definitely reading it correctly, that there's a lot more flexibility. Ultimately, there is an organizational structure where planning manager has certain responsibilities, and then city manager has the responsibility over the planning manager.
And if I could just add, all the places that we put planning manager designee in these code amendments, they should be places where it already said planning director designee. So we didn't, the intent was not to add more places where the planning manager, formerly the planning director, could designate someone else to perform a duty. So where you're seeing that, we're updating the language, but that concept was already baked into the code, that highest level planning person could designate another staff member to perform that particular task.
Where's the staff member going to come from?
I mean, I would assume it'd be like the assistant planner, most likely.
Who's our assistant planner?
We have an assistant planner, her name is Sophia Cheka, but it could also be, for example, if we had a vacancy or somebody was absent, there could also be somebody brought in on a temporary basis, for example, to fulfill some of those duties.
And they would be familiar with what our codes are.
Well, it's our responsibility to make sure that your staff is.
I don't like this at all. I feel like something's been thrown at me, and the DRC has had a lot of input in it, and we have had none. And I don't think that we have the time up here tonight to go through this document to make us all feel comfortable. That's just my opinion.
Well, there is an awful lot. I mean, it's big changes. I believe it's big changes, and it's a new position. I don't, without having my full book of 3-binder with 130 pages in it, to see that we had a city planning director designee for all these things, and we've taken that out. We're making it now a city manager's designee for these. That person has a ton of power, and we're kind of, I feel the same. I'm a little bit lost, and maybe it's, I'm a pretty quick study, and I've got zillions of questions I can go page by page on and ask, why is it there, why not there, why not there, and again, I'll take the hit. I mean, I got this on this morning, because I'm in Santa Barbara came out Friday or Thursday afternoon, and I tried to look through it on my iPad, and then here comes the weekend, we got a parade, and we got this, and so I'm quick study, and I spent 7 hours on this today, trying to go through and read it 3-4 times, and it's a lot to digest tonight. That's how I feel about it, my knee jerk, and that's just one question, but I could go through, there's a bunch more, and I'm happy to do it, or we could discuss tonight and then try to do it in January, but I would agree this is the first time I'm looking at it, and I'll take the hit because I didn't get it until today.
And I have a concern about the name change, whether it's director or manager, but the way it's written, it's the city manager designee, or the planning manager. So if I'm a developer or somebody coming in and wants to do something, who do I talk to? It's not clear. Could talk to any one of them, I could talk to all of them, they could give different pieces of information. I think it should be one person that is the contact for the planning department. And whether you want to call it the planning manager, the planning director, or something else, that's fine. But having 3 names in there, one being a designee from the city manager, and for the most part, there's only a few places in here where the planning manager is designated as being able to put a designee in, but not in every instance. So I have a question of, why is that? Why is it there sometimes, why is it not there other times? But my primary question is, why have 3 people in charge? Put one person in charge, should probably be the planning director, manager. They report directly to the city manager, so the city manager has oversight over anything anyway. So why is the city manager mentioned explicitly in every paragraph? And the same with the city manager designee.
So if I can make one comment and also maybe ask our assistant city attorney to comment on it in terms of the input that we are looking for from the planning commission, because the action of creating the planning manager position has already been taken by city council. So if Chelsea, if you can clarify what the role is of today's review by the planning commission of this particular change, not the change between the PC and the DRC.
Yes, so like Dina said, the position of planning manager is already created. My understanding is we're still trying to fill it with someone, but that organization has already happened. So these changes are not, the changes of, where planning manager is appearing, they're not a substantive change in the sense that we're just changing the name of the title. So from planning director to planning manager. And the places where you're seeing planning manager designee are the places where it said planning director designee before. So again, those are where they are because that's what the current code says. As far as including the city manager and the city manager designee, that's to add the flexibility that Zeno was talking about so that, for now, we don't have someone in that planning manager position. So it allows the city to, it's clear in the code that now the city manager has that role at this point. As far as what input we're looking for on that, I think we appreciate the input on, that it's confusing about having three titles listed, but whether, so how we've drafted it, the fact that it's or if there are specific places where you think that the planning manager should have a designee that doesn't have it, that's the type of feedback we're looking for. But whether the planning manager exists or not, that decision has already been made by city council.
I'm not sure that was the concern.
Yeah, that wasn't my question or concern at all.
Okay, I apologize. If you could clarify again, I'll try again.
Why are there three people there and not just one?
So, like I
The city manager
said,
makes the decision, or the city manager designee makes the decision, or the planning manager makes the decision. It should be one of them, and it should be crystal clear who's doing that.
So
I know
that's,
it.
And not an or maybe, or, today it's the city manager, next week it's gonna be, it needs to be clear, and it's not.
Speaking as a land use consultant, I would be infuriated if one day I talk to one person and the next day I talk to another and the next day I talk to a third. You're gonna get three different stories. You're gonna get three different inputs. That is extremely frustrating. Because then you go to I would go to my client and I would say, well, today it's changed. That's not good management. That's not a good principle to show how this is going to work to the public.
so.
I cannot support this and I will not vote for it.
And we appreciate all of your input, and we'll definitely take that input, and we can come back for more input if it was too short a notice on this, and if it's just too many changes at once, we can definitely return to you for additional input, or pass it on, all of your comments, to the city council. I can tell you that the intent of the language of the code, and I understand that you're very much used to how the code has read here for the city of Solvang, and it's near and dear to how you would like things to operate. The intent of making the code be a little bit more flexible was just to ensure that there is more flexibility in managing, for example, when positions are in transition. Solvang's code is a little bit more precise in terms of naming a lot of these positions within the hard code itself than a lot of other city codes. I would say that it's definitely, the intent was not to have multiple people responsible for the job, for the planning manager job at one time. There would definitely be clarity as to who is performing that function at all times, and that will be the person that is responsible for those decisions at that time. The only difference right now, if we have a specific title hard-coded in the code, which could be the city or the planning manager or the planning director, then whenever there is a vacancy, for example, somebody has to be appointed into that position, and that is how we have functioned. So, for example, if there's no planning manager, I have been acting planning manager. You know, it's a technicality, but somebody will always be the clear point of contact and will have the clear management responsibility over that function. I am open to how you want to recommend changes to the code itself, but I can tell you that was the intent. It wasn't an intent to have multiple people being responsible for that function and that position at any given time.
So you're saying that as city manager, you feel that you don't have the authority to do this
Well,
without it being hard-coded into the regulations?
I think what I'm saying is that if something is in the city code, then I have to have a planning manager, a planning director. I have to appoint somebody into that position at all times to ensure that we have the clear person who is that position. Right now, I am your acting planning manager because we don't have a staff person. So in essence, you have the same type of structure to where a city manager can still assign somebody into that function. But to Johnny Jameson's comment in regards to how do we service the community, there would always be a clear person that's the point of contact for any applicants or decision making.
And just a comment, I mean, I've been around a long time here. I've been on this, I've been on the BAR a long time. I've been a developer, I've been on both sides. And I know it got chaotic a few years ago, but holy smokes, it's time to stop the chaos and get these people appointed, get them in. We're changing the code because our city council, with all due respect, hasn't figured out I don't care if it's a city manager, I don't care if it's a planning manager, a planning director, it doesn't matter to me. We have a vacancy and doing a great job. Part-time, coming, going, it's difficult as heck. You've got 18 hats that you're wearing, maybe 20 hats that you're wearing, and it's a frustration. And I hate to see us just go down this road that, oh my gosh, we're just not gonna fulfill these positions, so therefore we're just gonna keep doing what we're doing. Codifying it. It's one thing to do it out of practice, because we just have to, but to codify it, I think we need to send a message. My recommendation to City Council is make this decision and get on with it. If that's how they want to do it, and they don't want to listen to our recommendations, that's fine. They're certainly, with all due respect, not experts on planning, as you are, and some of us are, and some of us have been around. I don't think they want to be experts at planning. They would like us to tell them what we should set out. This is just one example. The tourist board, or whatever we're calling that, is another example that's going through this. What are we doing? We need to move on. We're a much more sophisticated city than we were 10 years ago, and yet we had a much more sophisticated setting guidelines in our city staff, with you in charge of these different divisions and heads. It's a frustration for citizens. It's certainly a frustration for folks on the design review. Frustration for us. We used to have a parks commission. We don't have that anymore. I mean, I'm frustrated as anything, and I've been here a ton of years. So I'm throwing the gauntlet down. They need to step up. We need to get this thing decided and done. And if this is what they want, they're going to do what they want to do. And I'm happy tonight to go through page by page of inconsistencies and questions. I don't want to just go, let's wait till January, because there's a lot of good work here, and we could get some of the questions answered. I don't know if I'm willing to vote on something at the end of the night or not, but I certainly would like to go through those if we could. So it's no offense to anybody here or city council, but we need to get on, and we need to get a structure. And I think this is where you folks were coming from. Let's get a structure.
And if I may say that the structure of the reorganization is already established. There is a position that's funded for the planning manager. That exists. We are hiring furiously and quickly, and I must say that a lot of positions have been filled. A lot of new positions have been filled. We do have an assistant planner, we have public works director, we have utilities director that's coming on board. Planning manager is one of the last few vacancies, and frankly, I had a really good candidate who unfortunately just didn't end up being able to make the move, so we're back out there and recruiting, but it's a very high priority recruitment, but it's in the works.
And it's a huge position, given where we're at in the city, in my opinion.
Agreed.
I've got questions that I could just flip through, but I don't want to interrupt.
Okay, I have a suggestion. There are people that are here for a couple of items on the agenda. I don't think they should have to sit through us going over this. Maybe we could stop this discussion and do the rest of our agenda and then come back to it.
I'm fine with that, absolutely.
Want to skip to item 3, is that what you're saying?
If you could just
Yeah, make a motion.
make a motion to,
Go ahead, John.
no, to basically go to
Table until
item.
the end of the meeting.
So I think it would be a motion to continue this item until after the discussion items. Discussion item 3A.
That sounds perfect.
Second.
Move to second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Okay, let's move on to item 3, which is actually just a discussion item, right? We're not approving anything.
So once again, I'll kick off and then I'll hand it over to Chelsea. This item is in front of you because over the last, I want to say, 6 months or so, there's been different issues that came up in regards to Skid Mesa and some of the applicable codes. With that, we had direction from City Council originally to enforce all city code as it applies to Skid Mesa, and there was an issue that came up with sheds, to where a number of sheds were found to be non-compliant. The item came back to City Council for further discussion, and they directed us to temporarily cease the enforcement efforts until there could be additional discussion. And they requested us to seek comment from you as the Planning Commission as to recommendation on how to proceed with this issue and whether any amendments, as is requested by some of these residents from Skid Mesa neighborhood, warrant a review and recommendations to make amendments to Title 11. Chelsea, I'll hand it over to you.
Yes, so basically what the city council I think is looking for is a way to, the current code doesn't accommodate the sheds that we've been talking about in Skid Mesa. And the idea is to look at the code provisions that apply to accessory structures and setbacks in residential areas in the Skid Mesa neighborhood and advise the city council on what, if any, amendments could be made to the code to potentially allow for these types of sheds to be in the setbacks on the side yards of homes, while still, meeting whatever criteria you all think is appropriate. So while you're, I'll bring up the relevant code provisions and requirements. And again, I guess I should preface that this is another one where it might not be that you all get to the bottom of it today, but I think we wanted to start the conversation. And, the city council has specifically requested your advice on this, but if you need more time to think about it, that's certainly totally fine. But things to consider are, what kind of code provisions what kind of modifications could be made to the code provisions that currently prohibit the sheds in setbacks and side yards in the residential areas. And, what size, heights, or distances from buildings the Planning Commission thinks are appropriate for sheds and accessory structures. Fire safety concerns or aesthetics are also things that you might consider. So under the current code, as it's drafted now, if a shed or accessory structure is less than 120 square feet in floor area and doesn't have any plumbing, mechanical, or electrical, and it's shorter than 12 feet in height, it doesn't need a land use permit or a building permit. Sheds larger than that do need to get those 2 permits. But regardless of the size, the accessory structure has to conform to height requirements and in setbacks, front or side yard setbacks, And generally, setbacks under the code are required to be unobstructed from the ground to the sky, except for, you know, ordinary projections like your eaves or other ornamental features. And in the single-family residential district, the buildings have to be no less than 5 feet or no greater than 10 feet from the sides of the lot. In Skip Mesa in particular, the CCNRs provide that the side yard is 10% of the width of the lot for the side yard. So the other thing to keep in mind is that there are state building code requirements for structures that need a building permit. And those generally, for accessory structures, they generally have to be at least 5 feet from the property line. But if you have certain fire resistant ratings for the building materials, they can be a little closer, like 3 feet. But those requirements, you know, they would apply regardless of the changes to the code that you might suggest, but they don't apply to structures that don't need a building permit. So those smaller structures that I mentioned don't have to meet the building code requirements, though my understanding is that the Solvang Building Department encourages all structures to meet those requirements because they're based on fire, you know, safety distances and things like that. So that's kind of the outline. Again, we're hoping to start this conversation and happy to answer questions. Staff doesn't have any, you know, recommendations on what amendments to make. The City Council is really looking for the Planning Commission to use their expertise here and provide some guidance.
Okay. Thank you, Chelsea. We have one speaker slip on this. Chris Warren?
Yes.
Oh, does the commission, or excuse me, Planning Commission have any questions for staff before we go to public comment, or?
The only question I would have, and I think I know the answer, but there is a way to do side yard averaging. Is that only with permitted structures, or could that be with these accessories? And there's also a way to get a variance for a rear yard setback, and is that again only for permitted structures or for these accessory dwellings that are 120 square feet?
So what you're referring to, I believe, is what's called a variable setback analysis that you can do, where a portion of the structure, the portion of the house is further away from a side yard, so you can get closer to the side yard, but not more or not less than 5 feet. So in a situation where you have 100-foot wide lot, but you want to build a portion of your house, or you know, have an attached shed that encroaches into that first 5 feet, you just can't go any closer than the additional 5 feet towards the property line. So that's where we've tried to work with some of the landowners who had sheds in their side yards. Was there a way to look at the variable setback provisions in the ordinance to see if we could allow that structure to maybe be put up against the house? But the problem is you have to have it accessible from the house. It has to be part of the structure, which then gets into fire code and sprinkling and everything else. So
And it probably has to be permitted, unlike the 120s that don't have to be. So it's a double edged sword. I got it.
It
Okay.
is, and so.
And that probably applies to the rear yard setback variance too.
Yeah,
Same
and we
thing.
really don't have variances anymore. You know, there's very, very, very rare cases for variances. So it's really working with the existing code, with the setback requirements. A shed can go into the rear yard setback all the way to the property line. But, you know, again, it's just, we recommend that you know, even as a good neighbor, you hold 5 feet from the property line for drainage purposes and whatever, just to make sure that you have accessibility around even just the Pasco sheds, you know, that they have some respect to your neighbors.
Another question, our code, I don't think has anything in it as to the maximum number. In other words, somebody could put 15 tough sheds
There
or
is
whatever you call it, or is there a maximum? I know there's a coverage allocation, but if you're big enough, and is that true?
There is no limitation on it, except that there is the requirement for less, you don't exceed more than 40% of the rear
Coverage.
yard setback area.
Gotcha.
So, you know, and you can think of like gazebos, and, you know, somebody wants to put a patio, a gazebo, and a shed. Does that start covering the rear yard to where it's over 40%?
Thank you. Anybody else?
Chris?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for shuffling to accommodate us in the conversation.
I've been out there too.
It's very considerate. Yep, so my name is Chris Horn. I'm a resident in Skip Mesa, and I just wanted to come in primarily to understand the process from here, you know, in terms of who's deciding what in what kind of time frame and what kind of collaboration is valuable. And otherwise just provide some summary context. So we presented, I believe, on October 25th to City Council, and it was probably a 20-minute, some presentation and some back and forth. So you would absolutely get very rich and summary context if you were to watch the replay from that, to the degree it's valuable. But otherwise, the quick summary of the ask is that I and 20 other homeowners, I have a 7-by-7 foot Rubbermaid shed, and I have a 20-foot side yard, in between the fence and the house, right? And so current code doesn't support any structures, which is basically anything that occupies space, to be within my 20-foot side yard. And that's obviously the most natural place to site a place to put your lawnmower, right? Versus in the center of your backyard, and my home, backs up to Hans Christian Andersen Park, so I'm not gonna put it up against the back fence, it's just not logical. And so the summary of this is that we got swept into this issue only because a neighbor created a 14-foot tall, nearly 14-foot tall shed, which is obviously a problem, and the code should prevent, and the code did prevent that. But in that person's defense letter, they walked around the block and just listed 20 other homes that happen to have sheds, right? So that's how we got looped into this. So we're being held to this very restrictive standard of very restrictive setbacks in terms of wide setbacks, which is nice for aesthetics and everything. And then this definition of anything that's a structure can't be within that, and it's only being applied to our homes, right? We're fine if it's a reasonable policy that's being applied across the city, but that's not what's occurring de facto. So we don't think that's right, and we think that it's in the interests of the putting this issue to bed permanently for Solvang to modify city code to make allowances for small sheds. And you can obviously, the primary concerns are, fire safety, can firefighters access the property, et cetera, or aesthetics. All of these things can be readily mitigated with a couple of lines, of text that says you can't have 6 sheds, or you can't cover X amount of percentage, or they can all be mitigated. In the current scenario, we're basically, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I'm disallowed from having a Rubbermaid shed that sits on a concrete, slab, because of fears that the extra, 14 feet that's available there isn't big enough for a firefighter to get by, or that my neighbor might not like it. And in reality, nobody is complaining about these sheds. They're not a problem for anyone. And so from our perspective, the current scenario is a significant infringement on our rights as homeowners and property owners to enjoy our property. And so we're asking for the code to be amended to make allowances, so this is not an ongoing problem. And I think the City Council was very empathetic to our plight and ask. So if you have any questions, I can answer.
And I'm confused on this part. There was some CC&Rs that were more stringent, but never passed or never enforced. If you can explain that.
I'd be happy to. It has been a great source of frustration that this issue got conflated with Skip Mesa and CC&Rs. Our ask, the only thing that is hanging us up is Solvang Municipal Code. That's the only thing that's being enforced. Skip Mesa has CCNRs, but there's no HOA, there's no enforcement mechanism for those, and the city council does not want to enforce them, because they don't want to spend city money on something that neighbors should be working out with each other, absent an HOA. So CCNRs really need to be removed from the conversation, because they're not, this could have happened on Viborg. If somebody on Viborg, puts up a shed that is within the setback and it requires a building permit, and they go complain, and they go list 20 other properties adjacent to them that also have sheds of some kind, even though they offend nobody, then it wouldn't be Skip Mesa at all. So we're only asking for a review of solving, municipal code.
And so I have to ask this too, this is not necessarily for you, but for staff. When we originally discussed this, there was chat about creating an HOA. And from what help me with my memory, the direction was for the residents in Skip Mesa to get together and create it if they felt like it was necessary. Is that right?
Let me interrupt just a minute. If we don't have any more questions for Chris, why don't we let him sit down and
Well,
we'll
I
bring
think he
it
is
back.
asking him.
No, he was asking staff.
Oh.
Yeah, you weren't necessarily asking me.
Chris or staff?
Yes, there was, in the analysis that we brought forward to the planning commission and to the city council on the issues associated with Skip Mesa, one of them was the fact that there are CCNRs,
Correct.
but there is no HOA to enforce those CCNRs. And so the owners in Skip Mesa rely on planning staff or the city to enforce the CCNRs. And so the one solution would be that they create their own HOA, and that was discussed, and Chelsea provided a memo in regards to how an HOA would be formed, and they have not moved forward with that.
And just to be clear, the HOA would be formed simply by the residents in that area, in Skip Mesa area, to take it upon themselves to create the
Yeah.
HOA.
That's correct. They would have to do it themselves. It's not something the city can create for them or an outside entity.
Clarifying counterpoint, this is not an inter-neighbor dispute. We don't need an HOA to resolve this. We simply need the solving municipal code to allow small sheds within reason, where there's nobody complaining about them, and they're not a fire safety hazard, not a public safety hazard, not a visual nuisance. It's an amendment to solving municipal code parameters. So, again, even if we created an HOA, that would have no bearing on this, because technically, my Rubbermaid shed is a structure, and it's within, 10 feet of my fence and or 10 feet of my house. And you go to, Calistoga, Palm Springs, plenty of other great representative cities create smaller setbacks for sheds specifically to accommodate for this, it's not a problem. And there's a 6 or 7 page write-up in the last city council briefing that basically summarizes our position on this and has specific examples proposed of like what we would think would be a reasonable baseline. And certainly everything is under 120 square feet. That's a large structure. We're focused on small reasonable sheds where no neighbors are going to be upset by it.
So there are no CCNRs for any group in Skip Mesa. I understood that since there were 3 different contractors, there are 3 different documents that homeowners signed, and they are not the same as far as what is allowed and what is not allowed on your properties.
So there are CCNRs, but they don't preclude sheds per se.
But are they all the CCNRs the same for each contractor that built those houses? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think they probably evolved over time.
So this,
But again, if there's no enforcement of those,
Right,
right? If
right.
the city's not choosing to enforce them, I fail to see how they will.
And-
Well, it's relevant in the fact that people trusted these documents, and they're relying on them.
Right, but isn't that parallel to our issue with solving municipal code?
Yeah, I think it is. The CCR issue is something that was discussed in great detail. And as Chris and Nora pointed out, it really is not the question here. We're talking about city municipal code. exclusive of anything that may or may not be in any one of a dozen different CCRs that may or may not exist. We're talking about city municipal code and what effect that has on small sheds on private property.
And if I can just remind the Plan Commission that even though I believe, if my memory doesn't fail, your recommendation was to consider enforcement of CCNRs, the City Council had directed us not to enforce CCNRs.
But in getting all this information, I feel better now. Explain to me again, a shed in the city of Santa Barbara, city of Solvang, if it's 120 square feet or less, under the 12-foot, no permit required, as long as you have plumbing, electric, and all that, cannot be in the side yard setback, or it cannot be in the 10-foot setback.
The issue of the size of this structure is really important here, because you can have the little tough sheds that are 2 feet deep and you can put your rakes and everything in it within that side yard setback. What we're looking for is that 5-foot clearance so the fire department can get around them. So as we start getting into sheds that are 7 by 7, 120 square foot shed is 10 by 12.
Right.
That's
And the
taking
fi-
up
and
the
the-
whole side yard setback.
And the fire likes 5 foot between the fence and the structure, and 5 yard between the house and the structure.
Not necessarily, they just need to get around the structure, so they need 5 feet.
Gotcha.
So that's where we're getting into these different size sheds and where they're located. And I do believe that the code could be cleaned up to make it clearer. And the other point is that whatever changes we make to the code in regards to this, it applies to the whole city.
Of course.
It's not just Skip Mesa.
Yes.
And so, those are the things that we're looking at, getting some direction and then looking at how we could clarify.
If I could just have a point of order, I want to make sure we are still technically in the public comment part of the public hearing. So I want to make sure that the members of the public want to speak are going to have an opportunity to do so. We've been having some, back and forth with staff, but we are still in the public comment period.
So is there anybody else in the public, online or here, that would like to make a comment before we bring it back to the commission? Yes, I see a hand back there.
Sorry, I didn't fill out a slip. I was not planning on talking tonight. Good evening, my name is Rovi Butcher. I think I've been on Skip Mesa for 5 years. 2 months after we moved in, I can't remember the year now, I called the city to ask if a permit was needed for a shed, a garden shed. And they said no, as long as it's under those, under 120 square footage, and it can't be higher than 12 feet. So I said, okay, great. Called Tough Shed. Tough Shed came and installed it. I think 6 months later, my husband said, we need another shed. So I actually called Tough Shed prior to that. I called Tough Shed and I told them to check with the city. And they said, oh, there's no permit required. As long as it's under 120 square footage, under 12 feet, you're fine. So we went with it. I think 6 months later, or sometime later after that, we went ahead and had another shed put up in the side yard. I hadn't called the city again, just to make sure. And all that the city employee said, and I cannot remember the name, all they said was there's no permit required because of the square footage fell under the 120 square footage, and it was under 12 feet. So if someone calls to get some information and they're not told anything about the setback, which we all just learned this year, I guess, or 6 months ago. So we had no knowledge that the setback rule ever existed until now. So, and I just feel that if we have to take our sheds down, every residence in Solvang has to abide by that. because we're now talking about the setback rule and not just a garden shed. And our garden sheds are primarily for storage. It's not, there's no plumbing, and no one's living in there. It's mainly for storage. So, that's my personal situation. I called 3 times to the city, and there was no mention of make sure you follow the setback rule. So that's my issue. And I'm one of the 20 people that got lucky to be cited. So that's all I want to say. I hope we could find some, reconciliation or solution to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have a comment online? Let's see, Colton Skip Mesa is the name that's on the screen.
Yes, hello, this is Carla Colton. My husband Jim Colton and I live in Skip Mesa. Also have lived there since January 2017, similar to what Chris and Rovi are explaining. We're one of the 20 people who were indiscriminately or discriminately cited based on an irate neighbor who built the giant, 14-foot shed, which has since been dismantled. There's at least 140 to 160 houses in Skip Mesa. And my understanding is this ordinance applies, like Rovi said, to the entire city, not just Skip Mesa. And I might add that our neighborhood is probably one of the cleanest and neatest neighborhoods in the city of Solvang, which is a little bit of a rub that we're being, forced to spend all this time and concern about our garden sheds that are neat and clean and provide that clearance, that 5-foot clearance for fire and safety access. My husband was retired from the city of Santa Barbara Public Works as a civil engineer, and he went through all of those steps similar to what Rovi expressed, making sure that permits were not required and building it within the specifications. And so the fact that we've had to spend all this time, energy, resources, and the city itself, and the inspector, and the enforcement person, and the mailbox and post office person who had to deliver twice these certified letters, it's just, I would say, appalling. And so, short of driving through the whole town and with my notepad and writing down every single residence in the city that has a shed in their backyard and filing a complaint, I would like to see the city council direct that this ordinance be modified so that logic can prevail. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Anybody else?
There's one more hand up online.
Hello, my name is Jay Carsman. My wife Adrian and I live at 621 Valley Oak Road in Skip Mesa. We have on our lot side yard that's 20 feet wide. We have a tough shed that matches our house perfectly in decor, white with dark brown trim, so that it matches, looks nice. The tough shed is only 6 feet wide and 8 feet long, 48 square feet. We keep a lawnmower, garden supplies in the shed, a little table for planting, and that's it. Has no electrical, no plumbing, nothing whatsoever. We are among the 20 people who were reported by our irate neighbor as being in violation of the municipal code. Even with our 20-foot side yard, this tiny little building is in violation. The city code enforcement officer came out, he and I measured, and just isn't gonna fit. There was no place else in the yard to put it. Leaves us with no place to keep our supplies for the garden. In discussing this with the code enforcement officer, I mentioned to him that the other day I dropped off some donations at the Senior Citizen Center over by where the Sheriff's Department office is located. And lo and behold, and again, much to my surprise, they have a very, very non-compliant shed at the Senior Citizen Center. I'm not turning them in, believe me. I would never turn in, of course, the center, nor do I find it something as a personal issue. I wouldn't turn in my neighbor. I would just, if there was a problem, I would go next door and chat with my neighbor. That's all. I just think that we have a problem here in Salt Lake that truly has an effect on every resident of the city. It's not just a problem at Skid Mesa or any other area of the city. It affects us all. And that's why I think it would really be a step in a very positive direction if we could just have reasonable regulations for these very, very small little buildings. I would hate to see anybody all over the city who potentially have had these little buildings for years and years and years, and never has there been an issue. I think it would be so positive if we could just get together as a city and try to do what's right for everyone, for the residents, for the appearance of our city, and just to treat everybody the best possible way. So thank you very much for listening to my comments. I'm very grateful to you. Good night.
Thank you. Anybody else?
There's one more. Kristen Keller. If you would like to speak, please unmute yourself.
Hello, this is Kristen Kellner. I am a resident of Skid Mesa, of Solvang, I should say, and I just wanted to say that I support the revision of the code to allow for small structures, sheds, and otherwise. When I read the code, it seems like you couldn't even have like a doghouse in your side yard, and it just doesn't seem to make sense. And I just wanted to say that as someone who actually had a neighbor put in a completely inappropriate structure, the one that was 14 feet tall, exceeding the height requirement, not getting the required permits. It was a problem for me, but a small suitable structure would not be. And so I just want to put that out there that I think clarifying the rules would benefit everyone. So they go to the code and they can see clearly, like, this is allowed, this is not. And I think right now it's maybe just a little bit too broad and vague, and it needs to have some distinction so people are clear on what they can and cannot do. And we looked at a lot of city codes, and so many cities, almost every code that I looked at had exceptions or exemptions for small structures under a certain height, under a certain square footage, that they have either a smaller requirement from the setback, 3 feet from the fence, 5 feet, or even that they don't have to follow. They're exempt from those setback requirements because of the small size and the nature, and that it's not inconsiderate to your neighbor, and that it's not a danger for fire hazards. It's like small, tiny structure. And I really think it would benefit, as Jay said, I agree with everything he said. I think it would benefit the entire city as a whole to really look into this and put some more clear guidance in the code regarding what can be in the setback. Thanks.
Thank you, Kristen. Anybody else online? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion.
The 120 square foot, 12-foot high, you don't need a permit for it, that's in our code. Is that I mean, Tough Shed, I think kind of advertises it. Is it like almost a state or county-wide kind of thing, that 120 and the 12-foot high? Is
Well,
that,
the one answer is, the city of South Lake adopted the County of Santa Barbara code when
gotcha,
it was incorporated, and that's the county code.
gotcha.
And so, I don't think we've looked into whether the state building code or something else triggers that particular size. The building code definitely comes into play when you're dealing with plumbing or electrical in the facility. And then also, what is the separation of the shed from the house, as far as, fire access around the house? So, you know, that's where the 5 feet comes from, at least under the code that we're operating under now.
Well, and we have, and it's interesting because we've known this, because we sit up here, but it was reiterated today in one of the pages, you have to get a permit for a fence over 6 foot tall.
Right.
Building permit over 6 foot tall. So is there a way, and I'm assuming the 6 foot tall is so that your neighbor isn't looking at a huge wall. But it would seem to me, and I don't know if this is where people are going with it, but I would certainly support something like you could be at 8 foot tall within 5 feet of your property line. It's 2 gradations. To 12 foot at your property line seems ridiculous. You gotta get a permit for a 6 foot fence, much less 12. You back it up 10 feet, that just seems like, okay, at 12 feet, 10 feet back, but a lot of these are 7 foot tall, 8 foot tall, would certainly be able to be closer. And so, you know, you throw a dart at a wall and say, in the first 5 feet, you can't have anything. And then you can go to 8 feet. And if you go 10 feet, you can go to the 12 foot level. And fire is happy and the neighbors aren't having a 12 foot wall facing them. They're having the 6 foot fence, but they would have an 8 foot. If it was 5 foot back, you'd probably not see it much. And if you got 10 foot back, you could go to the 12. Forget the side yard setback, because if you've got a 200 foot wide lot, it's 20 feet on both sides, seems prohibitive with a minimum of 10 foot at 12. Anyway, that's something I could support. Just throwing it out there, I'd love to hear from others that have these, that would understand it better. And I don't know when they talk about the small tough sheds, the Rubbermaids, whatever, is 8 foot the height that they all work at because they're flat, you know, and is 5 foot enough? I mean, I'm just 5 and 10 and 8 and 12 seems like a pitch that everybody lives with somehow.
Yeah.
But I'm just throwing that out for discussion.
I was gonna say, what you're describing is basically consistent with the proposal.
If you could come up to the podium, please.
We basically, in our proposal, have, you know, if it's, you know, below this size, you know, then it has the least restrictive, like, you know.
A doghouse, like the woman
Right,
pointed out.
that a doghouse can be adjacent to fence, because
Right.
literally anything that's erected or constructed is an accessory structure, so
Correct.
trampoline, anything. And then, yes, if you step back, if you have a taller shed, so my 7x7 Rubbermaid is 8'6".
There you go.
So our larger size, that, you know, that's where we put it in, it's at 8'6", that, you know, you could have like 3 or 5 foot off the fence, you know, setback, and that would be fine.
And we get to the 12s, then of course it has
That's
to be
right.
further
And, yeah,
away, and
and
over
by the
12 you
time-
need a building permit.
Exactly. I mean, we're not talking about, none of our structures are, you know, approach 120 square feet, right? That's a larger, you know, shed, but still, we're in that, the question is, looking for those reasonable allowances where, you know, neighbors not upset, you know, and nobody's upset, not a fire hazard, et cetera. But yes, your thinking is exactly in line with what we're asking for. Yeah, and then there is that summary in the document, right, from the neighbor.
So on the issue of setback, what I keep hearing is because of the fire department. They need to get by. Do they need to
And the
get
building
by?
code, and the building code.
Well, building codes can be changed.
So we're referring to
But
the
do they
state
Do they
code?
need clearance on both sides of a shed? You know, if they need, in the front yard, they need to get to the backyard, do they need to be able to go down both sides of the clearance to get to the backyard, or do they just need a 5-foot space to get there?
It's just one 5-foot path of travel needs to be established.
That helps.
Okay.
But you can't be close to that.
You,
You need to have a distance from the house according to the fire department, which is how much?
5 feet.
Okay, so it's at least 5 feet from the house.
Mm-hmm.
And how wide are these things? I don't even know what the sizes of your setbacks are, so it doesn't make any difference.
So the city's zoning ordinance is 10% the width of the lot, 5 feet setback minimum, 10-foot maximum setback. It can be more, as experienced in Skip Mesa, where you had much larger lots. But the minimum and maximum setback is 5 feet or 10 feet. And
Again, that's for building structures that are
Correct.
permitted,
correct.
not non-permitted structures.
And that's where.
Then all bets are off.
Yes, exactly.
Technically. Yeah.
And that's why we want to clarify the ordinance and
Yeah.
come up with some of the suggestions that are being discussed here tonight.
It seems like we should be able to do this. It doesn't sound that complicated
No?
for non-permitted structures.
So, yeah, no, I mean, I'd make a recommendation to send to city council for just discussion's sake that we would say that the structures that are under 9 foot in height, roof pitch, 9 foot in height, could be at 5 foot. Over that, they must be 10 foot from side yard setback. I just do a gradation, and I raised it from 8 to 9 because this gentleman said, you're right, 8'6" is probably when they have the roof and the whole thing, and you walk inside, probably as the 8 is inside, and then it's got a little roof. So if it's 9 foot, it might cover that, and it's 5 foot from it, and over that, it goes to 10 foot, and let it go with that. And still keeping, of course, the 120. I don't know.
That's what we're here tonight, to get your suggestions, and we'll relay that onto the city council and bring it back forward as official ordinance changes.
Well, and that's just one suggestion. There's, I mean, there's also a open public comment again. I would make that motion so that one other person could, who's got her hand up, could speak.
I just want to add something real quick.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
We were just trying to get it figured out, right?
I think we're missing the boat here because there also is some clearance from the side of the house to where the shed begins. And I think that's where the 10 feet or 10% of the lot width comes in. Then after that, you can have your shed. And after that, you have 5 feet from the side fence. So you're talking 15 feet to begin with. And we don't have that in Skip Mesa. We have maybe, I don't know, 12, 13. So that's, it doesn't, we need to make accommodations. So I just wanted to stress that out. So there's 10 from the side of the house to where the shed begins, and then the actual shed, and then another 15. So that's, I think state law requires that. And I also had,
Well, then we can't change it. If law says that they have to be 10 foot
I think
apart.
at this point, the dimensions and stuff, we just need to bring back and look at some of the existing situations at Skip Mesa and
Gotcha.
use them as examples of how we could craft something that would, be applicable to the whole city.
Gotcha. Yeah,
And
and of
you
course
did say-
applies to the whole city, of
And
course.
And you
approved
did
by
say
the
they
fire
don't
department.
have to have clearance on both sides.
Correct.
Just one side.
So if they've got 10 foot from the house, do they really have to have 5 foot on the other side as well?
Depending on how tall they are, as suggested here. Because that's up to against the neighbor's lot.
but usually ours is under 12 feet. We don't have any sheds that are pitched at, I think 9 foot is the highest. So, yeah, and to add one more thing, I had the firefighters come to my house to check to make sure if we have access in case we have a fire. And so they came in the side yard, and they said, from my side yard, where the sheds are located, the sheds are not an issue for them to access the side yard in case there was a fire, so, yeah. Thank you.
I wish we had somebody from fire or building who would be an expert in safety.
I have a comment,
Why
please.
is it that it has to be a distance between the house and, what drives the distance between the house and a structure? I get the distance between a neighbor's fence and the structure, but as was pointed out, you have that 5 foot, then you have a 10-foot wide, then you gotta have another 10 foot, you gotta have 25 feet. I get, again, the 5, I don't get the house to structure, I guess.
There's
I
one
have a
more
comment, please.
public
May I?
comment online.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, this is Carla Colton. I'm in Skip Mesa. We have 5 neighbors who are retired firefighters, by the way, who also have sheds. 2 of us have our sheds next to our homes. And we have the 5 feet from the property line, but our sheds are against our house. So our firefighter neighbors also have that. So we have the 5-foot clearance for the fire safety aspect, but our sheds are against our house. Otherwise, there's no room for a shed unless we put it in the middle of the front yard. And there's also some neighbors that have chicken coops, I might add, that are on their side yards against their houses and that's a whole nother topic, I'm aware, but it's also something to consider. And again, this is a city-wide ordinance, not specific to Skip Mesa and only 20 homeowners.
Can the ordinance that we would recommend say that the structure could be closer than 10 feet? Or is that a violation of building code?
I think we will have the building department take a look at that
Okay.
requirement and how we can work the tension between fire department, building, setbacks, heights, and come up with something that addresses all those
I
points.
mean, personally, I'm more concerned about neighbors not wanting to see a huge structure than if the folks wanted to have an accessory next to their house. Why would I care as long as the fire guys can get toward between the fence and the structure, right? But that's, again, my feeling.
That was my point.
I think that's what we needed.
So how can we word this recommendation to the city council?
I think what we could do is refer to the gradation that was suggested here as far as setbacks from the fence line through the yard, side yard or rear yard, and then also have work with the building department and fire department as far as their clearances around these sheds. And that would be included in any ordinance changes that we'd be bringing forward.
And just to clarify, these changes are gonna be in Title 11, some of them of the code, which is the zoning code. So we'll have to have a public hearing on those changes before you as the planning commission. That's just required under our ordinance and under the government code. So we can make the recommendations to city council, but it will have to come back. So procedurally, if one option would be to direct staff to come back with a more concrete proposal based, like as Lori's suggesting, have a public hearing on it, and then take specific provisions to city council. Or we can take more general recommendations to city council and then come back for the required public
And I would
hearing.
strongly recommend that we make some specific recommendations and come back to the planning commission before taking it back to the city council.
I would agree.
And in the meantime, we're not enforcing these, remove your sheds at Skip Mesa. We're saying time out, let's look at it, correct?
It's on pause by
Yeah,
city
thank
council
you.
direction.
So I think what we would like you to look at is gradation from the fence, the 6-foot fence. And look at the possibility of zero clearance between the shed and the house. As long as the fire department is happy that they can get by the shed in a safe manner, I don't see where there would be a big problem, but I think if we can do that and bring it back, have public discussion on it, and we'd have the fire department input, the building department input, and have some more concrete things to work on.
And we'll bring some illustrations just to show how these would be applied, yes.
Does that sound reasonable?
Seems reasonable.
So should we just nod our heads, or do we need
No,
to make a motion?
no motion is needed, nodding heads is appropriate.
Okay, please come back, maybe in February at our next meeting.
Okay.
Okay? Thank you.
But you know what's interesting too, and I just have to say this, is that we had 6 or 8 speakers on the subject, and some of the speakers were saying that this was not, this was a Sullivan municipal code issue, not a neighborly issue, which is interesting because all 6 or 8 of the people, of the speakers, mentioned that they were upset with a neighbor. So I highly recommend that you reconsider the HOA. So this is not, so this can be solved once and for all. Again, you know, you can say that it's not, but every speaker said that it would, that they had a complaint about another neighbor.
May I comment briefly? It'll be brief. That neighbor's intent was only to justify keeping their shed. They had no idea that the city would open 20 enforcement actions against these homes. That was not their intent. So, no ill will, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Okay, let's go back to item 2A. And
If I can make a
Look
suggestion,
at Joni.
let's, for the moment, skip Appendix A and go to Appendix B, which is the definition, expanded definition of what the planning commission and DRC do.
What page is that?
It's in the 40s
I
somewhere.
believe it's page 44.
Page 44.
Clarify the design review committee's powers.
Yeah, I think it's, what we're talking about is basically pages 44 and 45. And the things that are in bold are what is being proposed to add. And everything else that I'm assuming is already there, there's no changes. Is that correct?
Yes, the bold underlined text is text that we are recommending be inserted, and anything that's bold with a strikeout, that's current text that we're recommending be deleted. And mostly that's just for the deletion in these 2 sections that you're looking at is just for, you know, making the new words make sense in context.
So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, anybody?
Well, under 10, obviously, the first bold, applications submitted for development plans, conditional use permits, and should we list other things that the plan, like specific plans? I mean, is this an inclusive list? And you guys are the experts at that. I just wrote down specific plan because it seems like it's development plans, conditional use permits, when it's major conditional use permit. We might want to put in major conditional use because minor is staff and DRC, or staff for darn sure. and specific plans, and I'm just trying to be as, if we're redoing it, let's be as specific as we can as to what we are supposed to be doing. And I'd like to point out number 6 up there, which is not changed, or bold, talks about us being involved with street widening, parking, beautification, which, you know, you got Copenhagen Street, and I'm just throwing it out there that it's gonna come to us at some point when and if that continues down the road. I assume it will, but I had not really realized that in a specific, under our preview. But number 10, if we're gonna list it, I'd like to just be inclusive with everything.
So if I can jump in there.
Yeah.
So specific plans, the Planning Commission provides recommendations to the City Council on those, I believe. So that's why it's not included in 10, because that's for reviewing, approving, and disapproving, or conditionally approving a project or an application.
So we don't even review specific plans. They don't come to us.
Yes.
No, you do review them, but you provide recommendations. You don't approve.
Okay.
The City Council makes the final approval.
Okay,
Yeah.
just 10 says reviewing and approve. So that's why I was I was just trying to be inclusive again from Commissioner Jameson's point of, if we're trying to get it really, where do I go? If I was bringing a specific plan, it's not listed. I mean, does it go to review? Then if we're reviewing, list it. But you guys are the experts. Whatever you have as to our powers, just let's be exhaustive in our list. More is better. But
I guess I would suggest if we put in specific plans, we should add language that, it's also providing recommendations to City Council, so it's clear and accurate. But that's fine, we can add that.
completely agree. My other issue is on number 11, and it is, that's probably one of my biggest ones. We're reviewing, approving, or disapproving, condition approving, or providing recommendations to the City Council on any application. So on any application, which is every application, so on any application which was design review, that we are to defer to the design review committee. And if we change, then we need to explain why the deviation. I don't mind that personally, as long as it said that we'll defer to them on their enumerated numbers, which is lighting, colors, landscaping, fencing, those things that are listed here that they are supposed to be doing under page 45, just next door. It says alteration of landscaping, mobile home overhangs, solar panels, lighting exterior. Again, maybe it's meant that, well, of course we're going to defer to them on that, but we don't have to defer to them on setbacks. But yet we just had this discussion on setbacks, and I would hate for us to get in that discussion as to we defer to them on all specific plans. Why not just list what we are deferring to them on? Because I have zero issue, I don't think anyone else does, when it comes to us and they start talking about exterior lighting, and we just go, you win, you got it. Blue? That's a great blue. That's what you folks are doing. Please, dear God, keep doing a good job on that stuff. I just don't want to say a blanketed, we'll defer to them on any findings that they come up with on any of these development plans that come before them. Why not just list again and again and again what they are doing and what we're doing? That's a general comment.
You may not have to listen, they just reference it by the
Refer back to.
2-4-4.
And that's fine. However we do
As long as
it.
it's there and clear, right?
As long as it's there and clear, we're just trying to make it clear for us, them, staff. It's so unfair to staff. It's more unfair to staff than it is to us in the DRC, and the public figures it out. But you guys are the ones that get beat up, and you shouldn't. It should just be, this is how it is. So anything we can do to clarify would be better.
That was basically the comment I had as well.
Okay, so that's 10 and 11, those are the big changes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we jumped to page 45, number 4. It's exactly what we want it to be, right? We want them to say, yes, this is what they're talking about: color, design, exterior architecture, buildings, landscaping. It just keep listing that stuff again so that people understand who's got what power.
And previously, the process has been that they had conceptual review, and they were waiting for the planning commission to take final action, but then they had all those conditions to go back to the design review, and that's the
I remember
cycle.
the development plan on Alisal Road behind Denmark Square, and I couldn't vote on it because it's right next to me, so I sat out
Yeah.
there, and it came, and DRC said, or BR at the time said this. Planning commission changed the setbacks or whatever it was, had to go back to them for this color and that thing, and then it came back, I felt so terrible. And so I applaud what we're trying to do here. That was one of our big complaints, streamline it, because we really don't care about the lighting and the colors, and we should, that's not our preview.
No, but we do care.
We do care, we trust, we trust,
And we trust them to do a good job.
yes.
And they do.
But can we carry a big stick too?
Yes.
So I didn't have any other comments on, I don't think, on attachment B.
One more comment on page 45 on G. That's a pretty broad statement. Again, it's outlining what the DRC is doing, which is great, all the way down to exterior lighting and telecommunication facilities, and then G is any other use. Structure, I get sign, development I don't get, design I get, activity I don't get. They're not involved with activity, they're not involved with structure. They're involved with those things that we just listed, 6 of them. G is kind of this catch-all. So if I was DRC, I would go, well, wait a minute, it's an activity, so therefore I get design review committee approval on activity. If that could be tightened a little bit, again, just enumerating what they get to do, because we're assuming, we're saying we're gonna defer to you. On use? No, that's you guys and us on use, because they don't know, or if they do know, that's not their purview. So again, the tighter we can make it, the better.
You suggest that we remove structured development and activity?
I would take out structure and development and activity. I don't even, if I would even use use, I don't even know why G is there, to be honest. I don't know. I mean, we list all their things, and then it's this catch-all of anything else that they want to talk about, and then we are to defer to them on use. I get design, I get sign, but use and activity, that's pretty broad.
That falls under planning, right?
To me, it falls under planning. Again, it's this, I'm just one person.
I agree with that.
So when, I'll use the example of the Bocce project. It was, and that's probably an anomaly, but it was a conditional use permit. We took it to DRC first, and they gave recommendations on some of the things that actually helped with the design of the project. One of them being, if you'll recall, the original you probably didn't see the site plan, but the original site plan had the fence right up against the right of way of Adderdack.
And you guys moved it out.
And the DRC said, this is something that I think would work better, is if they pulled the fence back and pulled the fence over here.
Yep.
So, I think that having their input on design can be a benefit, because it's just another
Agreed.
set of eyes looking at how people are going to interact with that project. And so.
And again, that was a minor conditional use permit that staff had
No,
the
it was
right.
it was a major condition.
Oh, it was a major?
Yes, yeah.
I
It
thought
can
it was a minor for outside recreation. I, again, couldn't vote on it, so I sat outside. But,
Yeah, no,
so a major,
yes.
and, okay,
So I think it may be, again, because they only get one bite at the apple, and if they have some suggestions about design, that might be a benefit.
I don't have a problem with design, or the
Yeah.
fencing, or any of that kind of stuff. I don't think they should have had, I don't think that they should have had the right to talk about use. If it was a major, so I stand corrected, major conditional use permit comes here. Doesn't go to them, doesn't go to you guys, it comes to us. And so, again, couldn't vote on it, I might have had an issue, I might have applauded it. The point is that was a use under a major conditional use, and I don't want to defer to them on that. But I think that we might have deferred to them because they reviewed it. Why are they reviewing the use when it's a major conditional use permit? Design, fencing, landscaping, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's what they were looking at.
Okay.
as part of that
And
project.
so just for conversation's sake, and I don't wanna drag this on, but isn't it going, if it goes to DRC prior to the planning, isn't that putting the cart before the horse? Where if we had a major issue, which we did not, but if we did, and if for whatever reason it didn't go through, that meeting that they had first would have been for nothing.
And that's,
Very good point.
somebody has to go first in this process.
Sure,
And so,
but that was my question, so
yeah,
wouldn't it make sense for it to come to planning first for the approval, so then it can go to design? I'm just making conversation, I'm asking.
and that's where it really has become a level of frustration, because what you're going to approve as the planning commission would include elevations, floor plan, site plan, landscaping plans, and everything else, and then we can take it back to DRC, they may have recommendation for changes. And so, then we come back to the planning commission.
Which came
you know.
first?
So I think that the way this process is being recommended is that the DRC, not only is the DRC reviewing it, but so is staff, the fire department, the building department, public works, everybody's reviewing this project. You get the complete package at the end with our recommendations on what you should be adopting for this project. And if there's any question, first of all, you can always deny the project, even with all the work that we've gone through with environmental review and everything else. You can still recommend, you can deny it, they can appeal it to the city council. But at least you have the full package of information coming from all the review that's already been conducted on the project. And it ends up completing or cutting off a second round of review later.
But then it goes back to my first point, which is where it is listed that we are to defer to them on those decisions that they made. I just think it's wrong. I will absolutely defer to them on fencing and landscaping, but not use. I'm supposed to defer to them and say no bocce ball courts, and I'm using that example. You know, that's a use and they got to design it, or a structure. And we're to defer to them, or we have to come up with a finding that says this is why we disagree. I think that's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. They should stay in their lane, we stay in our lane.
Okay.
But I
Can I make
agree,
a
it needs to
suggestion?
go to somebody first, you know, but maybe on a conditional use permit, it ought to go to the planning commission first to see use, if we're gonna agree, and then it goes to them, and they just work out all the great, wonderful details that they did on that project, the red and the setbacks and the fencing and all the things.
If I can make a suggestion and clarification, I think the intent of this section G was not to expand their powers into things that is the planning commission as purview. It's really supposed to be a catch-all that, you know, we're enumerating things that we found in the code that we know the DRC does, but the code is somewhat of a living document. So this catch-all is really supposed to capture, you know, if there's some other provision in titles 2, 5, 8, 10, and 11 that gives the DRC some specific power to review something, that's captured into their powers and duties here in section 244. I think we could tighten up the language so it's clearer that it's not just any recommendation, you know, the DRC doesn't get to review any use, structure, or development, but it's when specifically provided in the code. And then I think that with that might help the recommendation issue, because they would only be, you know, they would still only be making recommendations on the specific things that they've been authorized under the code to review. So it might relate to a use, but it's not like they're gonna have wholesale review of a use.
Correct, it's just that if I'm an applicant and I get the DRC to tell me that that use is what it's applied to, and then it goes to planning commission argues against it, me being a lawyer like you are, I'm gonna stand up and say, you have to defer to DRC. And because it says that in there, and so that's not in their lane. And it's hard for an applicant then, and it's really easy then for an applicant's attorney to argue that point, that it says it, defer, or make findings right now and tell us why. So if they don't have any power over use, take it out, is my point. I'm just trying to, again, because I know our intentions and catch-alls, but catch-alls in 3 years it can be a problem.
Right, and is this not already covered under item 3 above, where it says that they'll have meetings and specific hearings under the applicable sections of 2, 5, 8, 10, 11 of this code. And you're saying it again down here in 12. Aren't you saying the same thing twice?
So I think this also allows for, like, the city manager, G also allows for the city manager to request that the DRC review something. So that would be, for example, like the city logo, you know, the city manager asked for the DRC's input on that. This kind of gives that type of authority that, you know, is a little outside of the application process. That this is also serving that purpose. But certainly I hear you, and I think that's a great comment to tighten up the recommendation part of the planning commission's powers, that it's not just any old recommendation the DRC makes, it should be the recommendations based on their specific powers and duties. And we can certainly tighten up that language to solve that issue.
Okay. So,
I have
we're
a,
done with attachment B?
I got a comment on page 49, if I could, because I think that's still B. And this is just a clarification. So page 49, 4, and,
I'm sorry, no, the paragraph 4, the top third
yes,
page?
yes,
Okay, thank
I'm
you.
sorry, yes, that's true, there's 4. What, the question I had was notification, I guess. You know, we have a lot of things, and it's a thing that I always have had an issue with as to, comes back to the newspaper question at the beginning. You know, we put it in the newspaper and it says somebody can appeal it. Well, how do they know to appeal it unless they knew that there was something up? How do you prove a negative, right? And so a neighbor who doesn't know about it, whether it's commercial or house or whatever, they're putting up whatever, they got a variance in the backyard, and do they have to post that, and do they go everybody within a 300-foot radius? I just want to make sure that if we're redoing this, that we really do take a look at that, getting folks notice so that we don't get in trouble, but also so that folks feel like they're heard. A lot of times, as we all know, in conflict resolution, it's just being heard. It's not even winning, it's just getting your voice out there. And with these whole newspaper things, and how do we mail out, and how do people know what's going on in their neighborhoods? So I just throw that out as, if there's a way when your folks are looking at it, again, we get a bite at this apple to change this, is there a better way to get notification out? And I don't have an answer for it. You guys are the experts, and if it's just a newspaper, but that's bare minimum in the state, well, maybe we need to reach a little bit further. But that's just a point on that.
You can always mail notifications. You can always mail notifications to the neighbors.
Yes, for any public hearing on a project, we do mail out the 300-foot radius. up
So
to
if
the
they don't
property.
read their mail, that's their problem.
Correct. Agreed.
And those notices do talk about the appeal process and you know, include the instructions on code.
And that is already in the code, it's part of the code requirement.
Say that one more time.
The mailing within the 300 feet is one of the requirements of
It's
the
in the
existing
code.
city code.
Right.
I think that's all I had on 2 or B or whatever we're calling it, B.
So what do you need from us on B?
I think we have sufficient input. Chelsea, do you have any additional questions?
No, this has been very helpful. Thank you for your comments on that.
Okay, let's look at C and D, and then we can go back to A, or not.
C starts
51.
51.
Thank you.
This is all about the appeals.
Yes, and if I can just note that a lot of the bold, strikeout, and underline that you see here, many of those changes relate to what's put forward in Appendix A. It's just since those terms also appear in these sections, we're trying to represent, all the possible changes to each section. But for what the appeal part that this is trying to focus on is really just changing. There's a few places where it referenced appeal of a decision to the planning commission, but then cited to the municipal code provision for appeals to the city council. And so the change is just to change planning commission to city council so that it's more accurately stating that under that section, it's an appeal to the city council. So that's the main change here, even though you do see other bold reflecting the reorganization that we were talking about under attachment A.
Yeah, I assume that.
I'm still kind of confused with city manager's designee, planning
We're
manager.
gonna talk about that next.
Okay. Oh, that's attachment C. We're not on attachment C?
Yeah, but
It is
it's
in-
covered
but it's
under
throughout,
attachment
yeah.
A.
So for example, if you go to page 52, it's kind of in the middle of the page, G, capital G, appeals, that's an example of the change that we're focusing on in this attachment. You see it says any decision of the DRC, with the exception, or exception may be appealed by the applicant or interested party, and it currently in the code says planning commission pursuant to Title I, Chapter 6 of this code. But Title I, Chapter 6 is about appeals to the city council. So we're changing planning commission to city council. So all of the sections in this attachment are about that specific change. And then the other edits you see relate to the reorganization that's focused on under attachment A.
I'm just curious why that decision was made.
To make the change from planning commission to city council.
Yes.
After reviewing, staff found that the reference to planning commission was basically a typo because Title I, Chapter 6 refers only to appeals to city council and the process for appealing an action to city council. So saying appeal to planning commission pursuant to Title I, Chapter 6 doesn't actually make sense because Title I, Chapter 6 doesn't talk about an appeal of a decision to the planning commission.
And it's really appeals of what the design review committee has the final say on.
Right.
So it goes to city council rather than the planning commission that doesn't have the final say on those.
For example, signs. Like this section here that we're looking at is, 11, 13, 14, exception to the sign standards. The planning commission doesn't ever look at a sign application, so it didn't really make sense to us that you all would hear an appeal of a DRC decision on a sign application exception. That really should be going to city council. And it just seemed based on that and the fact that Title I, Chapter 6 is referring to appeals to the city council that the planning commission reference was in error.
How long is that living in this document?
Here.
I'd have to go back and look to see when this specific section of the code was last amended, but I think it's been unclear for a while.
So again, it's the sign application, but not landscaping applications. It goes, it seems to me all the DRC stuff would go straight to city council and not to us, or it would all go to us and then to them.
Right,
To
so
again,
there
to be
is
consistent.
there's a general appeals provision in Title 11 that says all DRC decisions are appealed to the city council. So these provisions were inconsistent with that general
Gotcha.
appeals provision.
So we'll never hear appeals for landscaping, the signage, exterior lighting, all that stuff, that would go straight up. As it
Yes.
should, okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
And a good example is the water wheel project
Hmm.
that, you guys saw the development plan process when we talked about parking and design and everything else. You approved the elevations. The DRC had some recommendations on colors that were different than what you saw, because the condition said DRC makes the decision on colors. And so when the colors came through and the applicant had questions about it, he appealed to the city council
Gotcha.
on the colors. And eventually, there was a compromise on the colors, and the DRC approved the final version of the colors. And that's what you see today.
Makes sense. Because it would have appealed here and he would have appealed it maybe to city council anyway. It's
Yes.
silly, right? Yeah, good point.
Okay. So I guess we're not recommending any changes in section C.
I didn't have any. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. And attachment D is, says outdated provisions and typographical errors. And basically, I think what you did was eliminate the second residential unit reference in here. That seems to be about the only thing you did, other than carrying over what was covered in attachment A.
Correct, so the second unit ordinance is no longer applicable, and so that whole chapter or section would come out. And again, the decision from the planning commission was to use state law for accessory dwelling units, and that's how we have been processing them since we got that direction. And, you know, we've issued probably 24 permits now on
Wow.
accessory dwelling units. And that's over a 2-year period.
Yeah.
And how many are doing both junior ADUs and full-blown ADUs?
I'm sorry.
How many are doing junior ADUs?
There's
And
probably been 8 junior ADUs and then 24 ADUs.
interesting.
Okay. So do we want to go back to A or?
Yeah.
And, my biggest hang up on A is what I've already talked about. That I don't think there should be 3 entities
What page
mentioned
are we
there,
on?
just one.
Back to 9 or 10 or 8, right at the beginning.
Page 10 is beginning of attachment A.
Well, yeah, I understand the practicality of, if we don't have a planning manager, planning director, whatever you want to call that person, doesn't matter to me. It's like the BAR, who cares what you call it, just have the power. That, you know, city manager designee, because we don't have a planning manager, seems wrong. We just need to throw the gauntlet down and say, gosh darn it, if you guys want to have a planning manager, get a planning manager. They might be trying, I'm sure they're trying. But in the meantime, I don't want to have it a designee of a city manager, you with all due respect, or anybody else, because it's a big, powerful position. Respect you, trust you, but I don't know what that even means. We're going to designate somebody else who works here to be able to decide some things. Beyond that, there are some places where the "or" is in there with the planning manager, and there's some places where the planning manager is not in, and I didn't know, I circled them, and I was gonna ask that specific question,
Yeah, page
not
11.
just the general.
On page 11, city managers, number 1. And then in E also, it says both of those things. City manager's designee or,
Planning manager.
It
Planning
says that,
manager.
yeah, it says that everywhere.
It says it, it does, it says it on 11, all the way through. If I go to page 12, at the bottom, I think it's 11682, family daycare homes. This usually is a city manager or city manager's designate. The planning manager's out, and I just wrote a question, why is out?
Yeah.
Why is the planning
Same
manager
question.
out? And then if we go to the next page, 13, again, under J, why is the planning manager
Yeah.
out?
And page 34, same thing.
Well, and just go chronological, page 13, another one at the bottom, under 2, processing 2, the planning manager is not in.
Page 16.
And then, so, I mean, it seems like everywhere that you're going to do it, whether we agree with the planning, having a planning manager, having a city manager designee or not, at least they should be ors all the way through.
Look at page 14,
Yeah,
all over the place.
14 is, so there's just a few of those where it's left out. I'd say 99% of the time, or is in there, but there's a few where it's not in there. And I think it was probably just missed it. I don't think it was on purpose. There was nothing special about those positions of daycare centers that you didn't want the planning manager to be involved. So they're just that tightening up.
So that is something that we can review and make sure that it's consistent. I think the bigger question is how do you phrase the code and from a practical application of the way as I explained, this was just.
Maybe you could turn it around if you feel it's necessary to have this city manager mentioned in there. Say specifically why it's there, that each of these falls to the planning manager. However, if the planning manager is unable or unavailable, then it would fall to the city manager or city manager's designee.
Correct. So I think some of this was meant to go this way to where, for example, if the planning manager was not available for certain decisions, it would revert up to city manager, versus in some other instances, it could revert down to a lower staff level in planning.
Right.
That's the structure we're trying to achieve. And perhaps there are some areas that are just missed and we need to add the or, and we can definitely do that.
And so that would that explain where some places it talks about the planning manager and planning manager designee, and in other areas, the planning manager designee is not mentioned.
Correct, that was my intention, yes.
Yeah, and now I get it. The city manager's busy, and the planning manager, he's out on maternity leave for his wife. Well, who's doing it?
Right.
Oh, the city manager's designee can make those decisions. Back to Jack's point, it's a fallback. If we don't have it, somebody quits and it takes 6 months to fulfill. Get it, 100%, but not just. And so somewhere there's a definition that says there's a hierarchy. It goes to the planning manager. I feel better about it. Unavailable, city manager or city manager's designee. She or he is ultimately responsible for their designee, obviously.
Right.
So we get that there's a fail-safe there, because you don't want some applicant sitting 60 days, 90 days while this gentleman's
Right.
out for whatever he's out for.
Exactly, and without that language, I would just have to appoint somebody to act in that capacity. So practical applications, the same result.
Yeah, so I think if you can just switch it around, I'd be happy.
And it kind of answers Joni's concern, which is, I go to her and then him and then her again and then back to, no, it's the planning manager, he or she's unavailable, it goes to the city manager's or her, his designee, and that's the person that you're dealing with then, it doesn't bounce around. I mean, you hear the concerns,
Yes, and we can definitely, if we can reword it to create that structure, but without having to mention those 3 or 4 people in every section.
In every
which we can
section,
say.
exactly, you don't need to keep mentioning, right?
It's almost like you have a definition section or a preamble at the beginning.
Yeah,
And
and
what's
if
the
you
purpose?
put that at the
Yeah.
beginning,
Yeah.
then you don't have to
That
put all
would make
those
sense.
words in every place, and just say planning manager.
Right.
Right. But if unavailable, then we know in the definition it goes, or her or his designee.
Correct. Okay.
Can I ask a question on page 14? And this was it's totally off of this subject, just B2. Minor alterations, additions shall be permitted without development plan review, provided alteration doesn't 300 square feet or the requirement for 1 parking space. clarification, a restaurant has a parking space for every 200 square feet of patron space. So I'm not saying it's inconsistent, I just want to be clear. I'd hate for a restaurateur to come in and say, I'm only doing 299 square feet. Well, no, you're doing one parking space. Why is that? Because I fall into the parking. And so maybe a reference to our parking ordinance, Mr. Restaurateur, because everyone else is 500. Offices and commercials 500. I believe I'm correct that restaurants are 2, plus 1 for every 2 full-time employees. That's always been a crux for restaurant owners like me. I understand it, but a lot of people don't. I get that you can do it every 2 years. You can only do 1 every 2 years. I like it down at the bottom, number 3, B processing, and maybe I'm reading it wrong. It actually lists you can't go over 1,500 square feet. Shouldn't those be consistent? If you read them, they're almost word for word until it gets down to the 2 years in parentheses and a total of 1,500 square feet. That and a total of 1,500 square feet is not up on B2 at the top. It's under B3 processing down below. Is that, and yet the wording, unless I'm reading it wrong, it's minor alterations, it's almost word for word. So I think what we're saying is you can do that 1 every 2 years, but once you hit 1,500, you got to do development review.
I believe that.
I just say just add the 1,500 because I think that's what we mean. And it's not your guys' fault. That's how it's been for 30 years.
I believe a 1,500 square feet was an addition that was added within the last couple of years.
Okay, we just
Because
didn't catch
we were
up on
running,
that part.
right.
That's all I'm saying. Good. Seems fair.
Couple other things on page, what page is this? 26. Under definitions, it talks about planning manager. And you crossed out and economic development director. Wouldn't it be more appropriate to say the planning department manager?
Well,
Planning manager is the planning department manager. Rather than saying the planning manager is the planning manager.
we can clarify that, but the planning manager is the planning manager. It's actually a division now. So if you get into department or words like that, you're kind of restricting within the code some of the
It just
organizational
makes sense to me
definitions.
to say that the planning manager is the planning manager.
We can clarify it, but it would be, I mean, it's essentially, planning manager is the planning manager. The reason the economic development director is crossed out is because once upon a time, the planning manager that manages the planning division, you're correct, was also kind of hybrid out to become the economic development director, and this is not the case anymore.
It's not correct.
I'm sorry, could you repeat which section we're looking at? I couldn't hear.
Page
1113-19 on page 26.
Thank you very much.
And that might be, again, one of the sections that talks about designees.
It does.
Mhm.
It's mentioned, yeah.
Page 17, and it's really minor, and maybe it shouldn't be in there, but I'm just trying to add. If we, under special events, 1112-8, page 17, it talks about special event temporary activity. Perhaps we just had parades in there. Parades. We've had such a problem with parades this last year. It's COVID primarily driven, but Christmas parade got changed because nobody was in charge. Who's approving it? Who's approving? IDK is approving. No, the city manager. No one's approving it. We Caltrans. It is a special event, and just to add, because we have like a carnival listed or circuses and ethnic celebrations, but parades is one of the big things that we do, just so that if somebody ever says, what do I do for a parade? You can just go to this section, special events, you're listed under this parade. This is what you've got to do. You've got to go through this, and you've got to do your application for a special event. And again, it's more people just from, you know what it's been like this last year, it's been kind of
Another
crazy.
point is, this section, was it 11.12.8, special events, says only applies to commercial, industrial, agricultural, recreational, and institutional zoning districts, not TRC.
I did not catch that.
Correct.
So that needs to be changed to
So
all zones.
and I have not paid much attention to this particular section, but in practice, the special events have been approved by the city manager for even prior to me, so
Correct.
we haven't been following exactly this process. And yeah, it will be a little bit bigger conversation in terms of
It will.
who
Process and permits.
process and
But maybe
permits.
just in all city zones and just add parades. I don't know, come up with more things, but
I just have a comment about parades. I thought the Christmas parade was great. There were a few lag times. We're big on getting those, getting them out there right now.
Mhm.
And there were a few elongations, but it was okay. But it was a great parade. I don't know if any of you went to see it, but it was. Well, doesn't count.
Oh, it
You don't- you gotta stay
Well, we
under.
have friends that went and they all had a
Yeah,
good time.
yeah, no, it was a great parade. It was very nice.
Thank you for
And
positive
maybe it was
comments.
even better, I know some people disagree, but I thought it was nice that it wasn't on 246. Because we had all the Christmas trees lined up there, and it just was nice. It was special. Thank you.
Thank you.
Continuing on, I have another question on page 20. The first paragraph, it says, as deemed by said department. Which department is that?
What paragraph is that?
The very first one, B, it says B, distributed areas shall be, or disturbed areas shall be jointly inspected. And then at the end of the paragraph, it says by said department. Which department is said?
just make it planning, is that correct?
I'm not sure what the intent was here. That's why I asked the question. I would have thought planning, but I don't know that.
Yes, we can clarify that.
Make it the city manager, she doesn't have enough to do.
Make it the mayor. Okay.
I have a question on page 21, agricultural employee housing. Do we have that in the city of Salt Lake?
Not that I'm aware of.
Where is it?
On page 21,
Oh, I see it, down at the
11,
bottom.
12, 26. Is that something we need? I'm looking to the attorney to tell us, do we need that?
I don't have any more information about whether we actually have agricultural employee housing currently. But something like that, it doesn't necessarily hurt to leave it in if we think there's potentially a future need for it. Unlike the ADUs, there's not state law that's conflicting with this, so we can leave it as is, or I think, this deciding whether to delete something like that would probably be a little outside the purview of what we've put on the agenda to discuss tonight, but we could certainly look into it and bring it back if that's something that the commission is interested in.
I don't have a problem leaving it in, it's not hurting.
I don't either, I just wanted to know where they are.
At this point, I'm not aware of any farm employee housing, but
Do we have any ag land within the city limits?
we have some residential ranchettes and a couple of small agricultural stuff, but not production ag.
I just don't want them popping up all over.
Can I ask a question on page 22, and this is off what we're looking at, but at least you highlighted something there so I can talk about it. Number 8, and I don't have a reference, was that special event, was that in a reference to a residential area or commercial, or what was that? I don't have my big binder in front of me. It's saying you can only have 3 a year. That's not commercial, that's not TRC, that must be, is it residential, do you think? Or what,
So
not you think?
it's in section 11-1230, which is for short-term vacation rental regulation.
Okay, so it's all under that short term, so they can have 3
Yeah, it
events.
just got caught right at the bottom of page 21.
Gotcha.
We probably should have put a return there, so it
Okay.
jumped to the next page.
Okay, got it. And again, if they're gonna have the 3, then they need to come in and get a permit for those special events, weddings and whatnot. And you guys will decide if it's too big or too small. Okay, makes sense.
And what are the supporting things that they would need, such as traffic control, bathrooms, whatever?
Perfect.
Parking?
Yeah.
General question, do we have, and maybe nobody knows this because I don't know it, can you do a wedding at your house?
Yes,
You can?
sure.
But you have to go get a permit also? Does it fall under this? I know this is vacation rentals, but
Depends on the size.
really, it's in there somewhere. I've read that 100 times. I've never
I got
known.
married at my house.
Well, you're in trouble. Yeah, you get a permit. Maybe you're not
It
married.
was at the Allen's house. Oh, now there we go.
Was it an accessory dwelling unit or was it an accessory structure?
It was in a house at the Allen's house.
Under, and again, we're shooting shotguns here, under page 28, under minor conditional use permits, I understand that the manager is going to make the findings for the minor conditional use permits. There's obviously an appeal for that, but under a minor conditional use permit, do we have to mail out 300 feet?
Yes.
Thank you. I knew majors, but I wasn't sure minors. Okay.
It's a discretionary, I'm sorry, it is a decision, and we do have to go through not only noticing, but environmental review, determine whether it's exempt or not. We go through the same steps, it's just
The deciding
yes.
body is staff?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And the rest of the changes were pretty much just the city manager designee, or planning manager, rag titles, yeah. It really was very just making it consistent.
How many managers are there? Is there just the city manager and planning manager, or are there other
No.
managers?
So the city manager and the city attorney are appointed by the city council. So manager, I guess, is confusing to maybe the city, but it's a pretty standard definition. So city manager, and then we have a structure of 3 departments essentially now under the new reorganization, which are administration, utilities, and public works, which utilities and public works were split up. And then we have HR manager, that's the new position, planning manager, which is basically essentially the same duties as the planning director, just a little bit of a different name. And then there's a couple of other classifications that would fall into manager, which would be.
Manager or director?
No, Park and Rec is a supervisor.
Supervisor, okay.
So all the managers and department heads are not under the union umbrella, And then supervisors and all other stuff are within the union.
Can you send us that?
So that is something that, it's in the budget, there's an org chart that shows exactly the reporting structure of everyone that we have, as well as same services that are continue to be contracted out.
So one of the two actions that you could take tonight is either make a recommendation to move this on to the city council, or we can have this at the February meeting with the cleanup items that have been suggested here, and then you could refer it on to the city council.
I'd like to see the cleanup.
We do need to have public comment. I don't know if there's anyone in the room, but we do need to open that before we get to motions or recommendations.
We do have one person online. If they have any comments? If you have a comment, please unmute yourself or raise your hand. Seeing no public comment.
Thank you.
So, Joni, did you make that as a motion to continue this to
Sure,
February?
sure.
And I will second that.
So the motion was made to continue discussion of this section?
After we
For
get
staff
it.
to bring back those
Those
changes. so we
cleanup.
can
Bring
see
back
them.
the changes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes 4-0. So maybe see, not in January, but February?
Yeah.
Is that too soon?
No meeting in January.
No meeting.
As long as our attorney is comfortable with us continuing to work with a planning manager that's not actually in the code, I am perfectly okay with that direction.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, there was one other thing for Chelsea. I forget where it was, but in your last attachments on the zoning regulations, in a couple places in there, it refers to the economic development manager that we've deleted everywhere else. You should probably delete it there too.
Those attached to the second staff report that we did first?
I'm sorry, what?
Are you referring to the attachments to the Skip Mesa discussion?
Yeah, it's attachment, can't read it.
On page 70 and,
No, 60.
yeah, so those are just pulled straight from the current code for that staff report, so we would certainly, yes, be addressing any inconsistent language in those provisions. It's probably reflected in the ginormous attachments to the item, the first agenda item.
I just noticed it wasn't marked as being changed, so.
Right, we just pulled, for that staff report, we just pulled from the current code, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, but thank you, we will definitely make sure that those are consistent,
so.
going through all this effort.
Any other planning commissioner comments?
I have no comments.
Staff comments, anything further?
Just two things, the February meeting, we will be bringing back these provisions, and we are working towards bringing forward the Sawbank Senior Center. They will be going to the DRC in an attempt to implement the new process that we've been talking about, get as much information, recommendations from them before we bring it to the planning commission.
So are they first in line to go through the new process? Is that what I hear you
This will be
saying?
the test run, yes.
Oh, I love it.
Great.
And I just want to remind everybody that on January 13th, we'll have the next workshop for the general plan update on the alternative choices. So that's at 6 p.m. at Vets Hall.
Okay, but what do we have this Wednesday?
This Wednesday, you have an informal GPAC meeting to review the alternative choices report, and that report will be becoming public around December 20th. And we'll have public input we'll be receiving through January 13th, and then hopefully have great public attendance at the January 13th workshop. That's probably the most important workshop for everyone to participate in, because we'll be discussing the land uses, which will then shape all of the drafting of all the elements, and there will also be discussions on, the circulation and the financial impacts of those decisions. So there's basically 3 slightly different choices that will be presented for public input as to where they would like to see Solomon go over the next 20 years. So we'll be reaching out, we're passing out flyers, we'll be sending out email blasts, and we're also doing some kind of catch attention questions that we'll be sending through Facebook and other media, such as, is Solomon too expensive now for your children to grow, and just some of those questions that we hope will catch the attention of the community so that we can receive plenty of feedback. So
2 questions on that. Number 1, what is the capacity of the vets hall during that meeting? And number 2, is that general plan on the 13th going to be Zoomable?
So it's not going to be Zoomable because it's set up in format of workstations. So there is interaction between staff, consultants, and the public. It's kind of similar to the last workshop we had. That way there's, closer interaction between the consultants working on it and the public, and we just receive all the input, and that input will then become public. The Zoomable portion, we had a very brief presentation on Zoom last time, but it was almost misleading because they really couldn't participate other than, just online afterwards. So we just like to invite everybody in person. With no additional COVID guidelines, we could probably safely accommodate 100 people plus, and we haven't had that type of attendance yet.
I have one other question, not related to this, but the voting district process, where is that now?
So the voting district, it's online, so we welcome once again everybody's input. There's a dedicated website, there's a link from our city website, but it's called districtsolomon.org. There is some draft maps, or actually not draft maps, but there's some tools to just kind of for you to be able, or anybody to be able to log in and look at, what the districts could look like. The draft maps, based on the input that we received so far, will be published on February 7th, and then thereafter there will be hearings with City Council to receive further input through the end of March, and then we've got to get all of our new districts to the county by a deadline in April.
And is Planning Commission involved in that at all? Or does it just go straight to the City Council?
Yeah. The Planning Commission is definitely welcome to bring your input as individuals into the process, and we engage that, but not as a commission. It goes directly to City Council.
And I just had a quick question, more of a clarification for anyone watching but us. So we have a development taking place in town at the old Union Bank building, from what the rumors are out there. And so that does not take Planning Commission, unless it's a development plan of over 300 square feet of 300 square feet of additional, then it's a development plan, yada, yada, yada. But if it's just a change of use from a bank to retail, that is staff building, not us.
No. In this particular case, because the building has been vacant for so long, it does need a development plan review.
Okay.
And so we've already talked with those interested in moving forward with this project. It will be coming before the Planning Commission for review. This is similar to what happened with the water wheel project, because it was empty for so long. It triggered this additional review.
But I want to really clarify for those who are concerned with where this process is right now and why the things that are happening are being allowed. There is a private individual that has entered into a private long-term lease with the owner of the property. Nothing has been done other than removal of furniture and clean up on the interior. So that does not require a permit. However, when and if they propose a project within that building, that will definitely need to go through a process.
Didn't know this, if something is vacant for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, I mean, there's obviously a trigger of how long.
It's
something-
3 years.
3 years.
If something remains vacant for more than 3 years, then, and somebody comes back in,
Interesting.
then it would come forward to the planning commission.
Is that a rental space also, or the whole building? Say if there was a little shop on
It's a
Copenhagen.
building. It's a
Okay,
building.
it'd be the whole thing, not just some
No,
space
not
that was
rental
vacant.
space.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Didn't know that.
Interesting. I think we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.